All right. Hi, everyone. Very good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to the Beyond the Jobs debate organized by the Progress Singapore Party. My name is Sean, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. The genesis of this forum today actually started with our recent survey on rebalancing Singapore's workforce, where we invited Singaporeans to join us as part of a wider discussion on the policies affecting the jobs and livelihoods of Singapore. So today's forum really is another step in this conversation that we want to engage on. And while the debate may be over, we believe that the wider conversation about the challenges facing the Singaporean worker must carry on. And so we have with us, joining us live on Zoom, the respondents to the survey, and we want to thank you for all the responses you have submitted. We hope that today you will find our session a fruitful one. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them by typing them into the chat function over Zoom. And at the end of our discussion, we will take some time during the Q&A to address some of these questions. Now, today we are very fortunate to have with us 4 panelists who come from a range of sectors and bring with them a variety of experiences. And most importantly, that they have been to the ground and understand some of the challenges that the average Singaporean worker is facing when it comes to their jobs and their livelihoods. Firstly, we have Mr. Yeo Lam Keong, who is a former GIC chief economist and adjunct professor at the LKY School of Public Policy. Next, we have Dr. Paul Tambaya, who is a senior consultant with the Division of Infectious Diseases and a professor of medicine, as well as being the SDP chairman. Next, of course, we have Mr. Leong Man Wai, our NCMP, and of course, last but not least, Mr. Francis Yuan, our Secretary General. Unfortunately, Dr. Hassan Ali is unable to join us this afternoon as he has been put on a HRW, but he sends his apologies and we wish him the best. So now, at this stage, I would like to welcome our Secretary General, Mr. Francis Yuan, to say a few words. Mr. Yuan, please.
Thank you, Sean. And a very good afternoon to all of you who are watching out there. And first of all, thank you very much for the respondents who have participated in our survey. Your input has been instrumental to help Manwai and Hazel in the debate during Parliament recently on this job. And what is more important now is that we all recognize that the plights of our PMET are indeed very urgent, and we need to do something for them, both in the short term and definitely in the longer term. So the purpose of this forum is actually to look forward and address the issue of this problem beyond also the big problem we are facing now, handling the pandemic. What we want to do really is to look at how we can address some of the problems that have been highlighted during the debate, and to keep this alive so that we can get ideas continuously to help to give constructive recommendation to the government to improve. We don't think we have all the answers at any point in time, but for as long as we are prepared to come forward and discuss and talk about it, I think good ideas will surface. And this must include not just the short-term tweaking of policies, but the longer-term structural issues in terms of the economic structure, and also the training of our young, and more importantly, this term called our Singapore core. The biggest threat now is that some of the industries that are currently facing issues of hollowing out of our Singapore core, which means the future generation of Singaporean PMETs may not even be able to participate in senior appointments in these industries if they are not going through the process of one level to the next level, starting from getting entry to getting promoted to the next level and then getting to senior level. So it's not about whether we need more foreigners, less foreigners, or whether we are xenophobic or racist. It's all about the fact that the economy, Singapore requires a balanced workforce. At any particular point in time, we will always need foreign talent to cross-fertilize ideas, to present us opportunity to share experiences, and to teach our people. And we want them to be integrated with our society too. But conversely, we also need for our young and also maturing PMETs to be given the chance for career opportunities and development so that our core can be strengthened. So with this, I think, I hope we could have a very lively and interesting discussion with Paul and with Lam Kiong here, of course, with Man Wai. And I would just like to now hand it over to Lam Kiong to tee it off to give some thoughts for us to consider, and we can start the discussion then. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Francis. Thanks, PSP, for inviting me to this discussion. I think it's a very important debate, and having watched the SICA debate, I think it's very important for us to go beyond SICA and go to the core issues, the deeper issues of PMET prospects and PMET progress, right? I think those are PMET, hopefully prosperity. I think these are the key issues other than just the narrow issue of SICA. And I hope today to have a discussion to outline these key issues and how they go beyond SICA, where are the main areas we should be looking at, and what, as Francis says, more importantly, what constructively we can do about it. First of all, I'd like to say that, you know, I'm a professional economist and commentator, and I am non-partisan, and I hope to approach this as rigorously as an economist as possible so we can get to grips with the real economic issues and the real tough decisions that we all need to make, and at least gain some understanding of them. So I'm going to have a presentation in my short talk on which we discuss on three parts. The first, I'm going to discuss the economic history, which is a rather long one, but it's important to understand the big policy errors that led to the current rather bad situation facing our PMETs, and understand it not to point fingers, but understand it so that we can know the depth and the necessity for bold transformative action and sustained systematic action to get us out of this situation. We also need to understand what particular things we need to start off with and how we need to sustain this action going forward. And we can only do this from a proper understanding of history. So I'll talk about the history. Then secondly, I want to talk about the short to medium term measures that we need to pull us out of the situation to get to a better place as far as PMET prospects goes. And finally, the medium to longer term prospects. Okay, so I'm first going to talk about the history. And the history, unfortunately, is the history of 20 years of what I think is probably one of the most difficult and, if I would say, the worst policy errors that we have made strategically, which is excessive immigration between the years 1990 and 2010. And this encompassed, in the first instance, unskilled and semi-skilled immigration through the 90s, as well as the 2000s, and we brought in nearly 1.2 million low-skilled and semi-skilled workers, depressed wages. At times, and even still have a residual working poor problem of the absolute working absolute poor that we have to contend with as a heritage of this policy. But I want to focus today on the PMET section of it, which is that the PMET section of it is more in the 2000s, when we let in also a huge amount of S-Pass workers and PRs. You might say, well, what's wrong with letting in lots of skilled workers? You know, as Francis said, we need high quality foreign workers to help us improve the economy and train our people. But the problem is that I think it's a problem of scale and it's a problem of quality. I think in this case, just to give you an idea, we, on the On the PRs alone, we let in at our peak in the 2000s some 80,000 PRs a year. Okay, and this is compared to an annual school cohort of 40 to 50,000 people. So we let in nearly twice the amount of school, and this is PRs alone, not counting the S-Pass people, right? So we let in 200% of our basic educational cohort. To give an idea, the US, which is, lets in quite a few foreign skilled workers and is quite well known for letting in high quality foreign skilled imports, they let in 4 to 5% of their school going cohort. So it's 4 to 5% compared to 200%. In other words, we've let in foreign so-called skilled workers at a rate, or professional workers at a rate that has not been seen outside the OECD, perhaps only in Dubai. And in the case of Dubai, of course, it completely stultified the growth of their own professional classes. And in our case, not so bad, but it did have significant dampening and negative impacts on our PMETs. As for S-passes, I heard anecdotal evidence that they were giving out S-pass application forms in many of the major cities in China, right? And so this was part of our mistaken policy of going for growth, going for quantity of growth over quality of growth. And the problem is that a lot of these PRs and a lot of these S-pass workers, unlike in the US, where you had to be as good as, if not better than the local labor force, so that they could teach, so that they could impart skills, were in fact significantly worse. Their qualifications were subpar compared to our qualifications. Their experience was sometimes much less. What they had going for them was that they were cheaper, right? So this had the cumulative impact of, in many key sectors, particularly in engineering and computer sciences, dampening wages for entry-level PMETs to the point at which Singaporeans did not want to take up engineering or computer science for quite a period of time. When I went to school, when I was in university, the best students took engineering, but by the time we got to 2010 and years after, even up to fairly recently, you took engineering as a last resort. And this is the reason, and the reason for this is because it was not worth their while to invest in an engineering education when the career prospects were so low, being dragged down by the wages of this excessive so-called skilled employment. As a result, we have become addicted to large quantities of S-pass workers, and we do not produce enough of our own engineers going forward, so it's become a vicious cycle, and this is the current situation we find ourselves in. So this is the current situation we find ourselves in, and how do we get out of the situation, right? So I'm going to talk about the short to medium term measures that I think we need. I'm going to avoid very radical suggestions, but go with a lot of the recommendations that have been made by prominent establishment economists. So, for example, I think the first thing we need to do is to gradually scale up the quality and the price of our S-pass workers. Now, Mr. Ravi Menon has recently made, managing director of MES, who I have a great deal of respect for, has made a very good suggestion that we shift up the minimum wages for S-pass workers from currently, I think it's $2,500, towards the $4,500 median wages that we have in Singapore today. He doesn't want to do it immediately, but I think it makes sense to scale this in over the next, say, 3 years, maybe 5 years, to give industry time to adjust. But we need to have that as a sustained effort and as a target. Now, this will have the effect of raising the quality of our foreign skilled imports and making them more expensive so that firms will hire our own Singapore core as a result and incentivize our own people to get such qualifications. This argument can be extended to PRs too. So for a PR, what should be the minimum guideline wages? If Mr. Menon is right on S-pass workers, there have been talk about $8,000 to $10,000 a month. And so therefore, there's no reason why we shouldn't scale up our minimum entry qualifications for PR towards that, right? Now, this will use the market mechanism to allocate foreign workers, cheap foreign workers, where locals don't want to and don't want to take up those qualifications, but it will shift. The more expensive foreign workers will shift industry to hiring locals in the areas where the supply is most evident, and Mr. Menon suggests certain industries like education and medical services, where the elasticity of substitution between foreigners and locals is highest. This will naturally happen. We can also think about quotas in these areas if this action is not fast enough, right? But the market allocation mechanism, primarily through the more rigorous control of immigration policy, is a first step, I think, on a 3-year to 5-year horizon. All right. What other measures can we do in the short to medium term? I think we also need to look after, besides the entry-level people, we need to look after the more mature PMETs, right? And more mature PMETs have a chronic problem because in the situation that I just mentioned historically, firms will just, they are first of all bound into lower value-added engineering as well as economic operations. They don't need such high-quality engineers because you're supplying unlimited quantities of lower quality engineers. So when our skilled local workers reach age of 40 to 50, it's the logical thing to let them go and hire these new cheap foreign hires. And that's why you see many such things happening, right? And so this negatively impacts our mature workers. What we need to have here then is therefore we need to have, first of all, an unemployment insurance or unemployment support system that will enable our more mature workers to spend enough time in the labor force looking for job opportunities that suit their experience and not waste the experience of quickly jumping on, becoming a Grab driver and getting involved in a chronic way in the informal economy, right? We therefore need to think about a 3 to 6 month period of unemployment insurance support, and maybe longer if there is serious training involved, like in Scandinavian countries. Mr. Ravi Menon has mentioned this as well. Okay. Finally, we need to have a higher workfare income supplement to help all those workers who do not manage to actually reskill themselves, find higher jobs, and continually be part of the informal economy, and to give them some working security as they go through their careers. It could be a 20-year career from the age of 45, right? So these are the medium-term measures I think we definitely need to think about implementing. What about the longer-term measures? The longer-term measures are simply we do not have an adequate industrial policy to produce the high-quality jobs to hire these people at high-quality, occupations and pay on a sustained basis. We need, therefore, to focus not just on foreign direct investment, but we need to seriously have an industrial policy that brings up our SME sector. This has been missing in action for many years. CSG does not do it to the level that it needs to be done. You need to have a one-stop shop, and people like Inderjit Singh have been talking about this, where we can see to the upgrading needs, the extension in technology, the marketing needs, the finance needs of our SMEs on a multi-agency basis with the same kind of authority and clout as the EDB. Second, we need proper financial infrastructure for SMEs. We're talking about Exim banks, we're talking about credit cooperatives, we're talking about the kind of financial support you see in countries like Germany and Taiwan. We need to talk about proper venture capital equity support, growth capital equity support. These are still missing in action, right? Thirdly, we need to think seriously about revitalizing our manufacturing sector. We had a very good session in FOSG with Francis was there. And we're talking about actually raising the share of manufacturing in the economy from its current 17% back to 25 to 30% where it used to be. And the locus of that would be to create these high value added manufacturing jobs. Mr. Inderjit Singh suggested that we could have productization and commercialization, subsidized initiatives for that. that made use of the huge amounts of subsidies we've been pouring into R&D, but now are lost as these are being productized and commercialized elsewhere. So all these things we need to do, and finally, I think we need to reform our GLC sector so that they can be the big brothers to our SMEs in the region. Right now, they are not in fit form to do that, right? So we need that. And finally, I think the final thing we need to help our seniors is, if after all these efforts, many of them, less so than the poor, but they're still going to fall out of, and at the end of their careers, maybe over 20, 30 years of gig economy type jobs without sufficient savings. So they should be eligible also for the senior silver support scheme, right? Right now, many of these PMETs, because they already have their own flats, the assets that they own prevent them from getting this kind of non-contributory pension support. They should be eligible for this, and of course the levels of such support are much too low at the moment. The level of WIS needs to go up $500 to $600 a month. The SSS needs to go up $500 to $600 a month. So we have a combination. I just want to summarize. We need a coordinated, sustained, systematic, deep and bold measures in a number of areas to solve this PMET prospect problem, right? They are immigration policy on the one hand, social policy on the other, industrial policy on the other, and education policy on the other. We also need, for example, I just forgot to mention education policy, to upgrade the our ITE courses towards vocational courses, right? We need vocational courses that are move towards the levels that we see in apprenticeship courses in Germany. We need to have our poly boys and our university boys involved firsthand in doing productization and commercialization, right? So we need education. So all these policies, I think we need, which come up together as a package that is deep, that is radical, systematic, sustained. And unfortunately, I do not see any of this at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you for that very helpful introduction, and of course, as a way to kick off the debate. Kick off this forum discussion we have today, not a debate certainly. And I would say it is very useful in the sense that it provides a framework for us to start our discussion today. And perhaps we would just want to pick up on the very first major area that you mentioned, Mr. Yeo, about immigration policy. Certainly that would have an effect on the employment situation in Singapore. And so, Dr. Tambaya, I understand SDP has some views and also a talent track scheme as well. Perhaps you'd like to share what is your perspective on this issue of immigration policy in Singapore.
Thank you very much to the PSP for inviting me to this forum, and also for giving me the opportunity to share a little bit about our SDP's talent track policy. So, don't get us wrong. Like the PSP, we are not against foreigners. We are not xenophobic. We do recognize that Singapore has benefited tremendously from the contribution of many foreigners. My grandfather came here almost 100 years ago to be a principal of a school. So there were many people who have made contributions to specific needs, to specific gaps. Now, the SDP's talent track policy essentially identifies gaps. What are the areas that we need individuals with specific skills and talents, and then we give them points. But it's not just the skills or the talents, it's also the commitment, the willingness to make Singapore home. And I think Lam Kyong talked about that, or was it Francis, that we are welcome to individuals from wherever they come from. As long as they are committed to Singapore, they're willing to make a contribution, and they're willing to put down their roots. So all of that is in our SDP population policy, and I think it's quite close to what the PSP has been talking about, into being open, but not throwing open the floodgates. And also the motivation has to be there. Because what we're looking for is people who are willing to contribute to Singapore and fill gaps that are based on historical practices. We don't want the current policy, which seems to be to flood the market with low-wage workers who are going to drive the wages of the lower income even lower. Actually, they've stagnated for a long period of time in terms of purchasing power capability. And we've just heard about that with the property market. The wages have not been able to keep up with the rate at which the property market has gone up. And at the higher end, we don't want people coming in who are just being afraid of being deported. They're much easier to control, but that's not the kind of talent that we want.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Tambaya, for that insight. So I think maybe Mr. Leong, you would have some perspectives. After all, this is one of the things you spoke about in Parliament.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all of you who have come in to participate in this webinar, especially those who have responded to our survey. Thank you again. Your feedback has been very useful for our debate in Parliament 2 months ago. To add on to what Lam Keong and Dr. Paul Tambaya has said, I think we are by and large very aligned in our opinions that foreigners are important for our Singapore economy. However, a rebalancing is important as well, because the government has been too liberal in letting in too many foreigners, especially also like Paul Tambaya. Dr. Paul Tambaya has said the quality of the foreigners that have come in is a problem, because when all these average foreign professionals have come in, they are actually in direct competition to our Singaporean PMETs. So that's something that immediately we need to address. So like what Lam Keong has said, we need to raise the minimum qualifying salaries. Once you raise the minimum qualifying salaries, then we can raise the quality of the foreign professionals who are coming in, and so we'll reduce the competition for our entry-level Singaporeans. At the same time, at the higher level also, in the 40 and 50 years old level, many of our Singaporean mature PMETs are being displaced. So if the wage depression is being slowed down, when we raise the minimum qualifying salaries for the EPs, for example, to $10,000, then that would also slow down the displacement of the mature Singaporeans. So that's why our two key recommendations in Parliament during the debate was that we raise the SP salaries to $4,500 and the EP minimum salaries to $10,000. So that was the main thrust of our argument, which is more or less in line with what Lam Keong and Dr. Paul Tambaya said. So, of course, what we have said in Parliament, we have initiated the jobs debate with the understanding that this is only the first step. We think that, to put it in colloquial terms, maybe you can say to stop the bleeding. Because if there should be more leeway for Singaporeans to find the right and the good jobs. So after they found the jobs, we stop the bleeding, then we can think of how to transform our economy and then to actually create better jobs. And this whole thing requires, like what Mr. Lam Keong has said, requires a whole industrial policy, and there are many components to it. Okay, Lam Keong had elaborated on some of them, but really that is an area that requires a lot more discussion and also a lot more different kind of policies before we can realize the ultimate aim of really building a vibrant economy in Singapore. But at the moment, I think the first step is that we have to address the foreigners issue first, going forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. So I think we have covered really the extent of the problem with regards to immigration in Singapore. And perhaps now we want to look more local in terms of what we can do to help the Singaporean worker by way of the social policies and as well as the industrial policies, as Mr. Yeo has helpfully summarized for us. So would anyone here want to chip in and start this conversation about really the local policy changes that can be made?
Let me just maybe chip in the idea on the industrial side, because we spoke about Singapore establishing the external wing, and unfortunately, I mean, probably Lam Keong and Paul may want to comment on this, have not been very successful. And then you have Temasek investing overseas, but essentially a lot is mainly for financial returns rather than a more strategic kind of approach. In a way, duplicating actually GIC, what they're doing, right? I mean, investing in the different areas, including banks. Why aren't we thinking of possibly investing for strategic reasons. You go overseas, invest in project, and bring our PMET overseas there to help manage these so-called ventures. And in a way, create our own external wing. That is one, could be not maybe short-term, but at least a medium-term approach that we could. You know, why are we thinking in terms of bringing people in here and not bringing our people out there? And then grooming them so that they can become professional to be sought after worldwide. And then essentially there are many Singaporeans who are talented enough to be able to do that. And what more if we invest overseas and have this as a requirement to at least bring some of our people over there. Secondly, really is the concept of, I always quote it, the Nike concept. Not just do it, but the whole idea of the business model. For a country like Singapore, I mean, having large manufacturing outfit is not the answer. We don't just have land and resources and even the manpower to do that. But you look at the Nike, the Apple, and all these guys, what do they do as a business model? They own the brand, they own the distribution, they own the design and development, and then they probably outsource the whole manufacturing outside. You go to Guangzhou, you know, you go to a different part of China where our station go for a while, they'll just ramp up the production of this the factory. If the demand is high, they ramp it down, so they don't have to worry about workers. So conceptually, for us as a grouping, let's say in ASEAN, we could think about, you know, building brands, you know, using our R&D resources to do stuff, and then split the manufacturing in the region, employing our own people as well, and we own the distribution, which employ a lot of people, and we own the branding, and that is probably a way out, responding to this industry so-called, we call it the business model. If we start thinking along this line, I think there are options that perhaps it may not be just overnight you work it out. There may be options that we can do over the next 5-10 years, or maybe even earlier, that can help alleviate a lot of the problems that we have today.
Right. So, Francis, I think you mentioned a very interesting point about this Nike concept, bringing our brands overseas. And Mr. Yeo, you talked about really the support that GLCs can play as a big brother, and to some extent also EDB providing some additional support, and as well as even venture capital bringing funds to really contribute to this effort. So would you be able to comment really on how, in terms of practical steps, some of our local SMEs will be able to find the adequate support that they need through various policies by these various branches to solve this situation?
I was talking just now earlier about industrial policy solutions that are one key component of the solution to the problem of the prospects of PMET jobs, good PMET jobs going forward. We have to take into account that this is a very serious problem, because not only are we finding that foreign direct investment may not be so committed to the kind of supply chain investments they have in the past, but also the world's being split up into Chinese bloc, US bloc, and also you have the problem of artificial intelligence, which are making a lot of the PMET jobs as we know them today obsolete and will be taken over by automated intelligence, right? So this is really a serious problem, and therefore creating the maximum number of good jobs that can still survive all these forces is of paramount importance. And this can only be done by a coherent industrial policy. Francis has made some very good suggestions, but they need to be done in the context of first and foremost, an agency that looks after our SMEs in a systematic, multi-silo way, right? Just as EDB does for foreign direct investment, so too we need to do it for SMEs. So you need to have that. Then you need to have the infrastructure, the financial infrastructure that backs this up, the credit cooperatives, the loan banks that look beyond just making a high ROE on invested capital as a financial institution, right? That have as their objective industrial development, not maximizing financial sector returns, right? We don't have that. Now, once you have these, then you can begin to think about concrete policies that Francis was mentioning, right? How do we actually move into the region, create high value added jobs in the hub as we move into the region as as our spokes, right? Because the region is a huge, dynamic, growing economy, right? There we need to think about what's the future of such industrial policy, industry in the region. There's a huge future, right? Because the region is just beginning to industrialize. How can we make ourselves the hub of that? Francis has said that we can use Temasek resources as an investor. That makes sense because we don't just have to rely on government budget. Temasek's original mission, I'd like to remind you, was in fact to be a development bank, right? A development fund for key industries that the private sector was not able to take up. This was the origin of Temasek. It's going back to its roots. It makes a lot of sense to use some of the money for that. Secondly, I think we need to think about clear, concrete strategies in which we can actually actualize this. In our discussion with FOSG and with Francis, Inderjit Singh suggested productization and commercialization, prototyping of all the huge money that we've been putting into R&D that can be therefore prototyped in Singapore with our local engineers. And then once it has been shown to be viable, then we can actually move it out into the region to the lowest cost area. But this process is overseen, designed, and engineered by our own guys as far as possible with some high quality foreign imports. And I stress high quality, not the kind that we've been seeing in the past, right? So this is where we can also, if we locate it in our universities, use our university students, engage them in this process, and then move out into the region. Now, at that stage, that's where we will need perhaps Temasek finance and perhaps the help of our GLCs to move in as the big boys and bring our SMEs on as little brothers. Now, this is being done all the time by the Koreans, by the Taiwanese, by the Japanese, by the Germans, right? The only place it's not being done is in Singapore. Because currently, our GLCs don't see that as their mission. They see it as their mission is to make a lot of profit, so very often they're predatory to us, to their little brothers instead of helping them. So they need to be reconfigured to be made fit for purpose to push forward this kind of industrial policy so that we can achieve that kind of vision that Francis has enunciated, right? We're beginning to locate to seed manufacturing in the region. We are beginning to get our guys to do all the high value added engineering and business management and business development, executive thinking and management and senior management when you move there. These are the plum jobs, right? These are the high value added jobs that we want. And we are helping our neighbors get high value added manufacturing relative to their economies, much lower relative to ours. And so it's a win-win situation, and this makes a lot of sense. But this is a 5 to 10 year effort. And we need to do all the immigration policy and have the supportive social policy before we can get there in one piece. It's a systematic thing. It requires the help of all these arms, right? Immigration policy, education policy, social policy, and industrial policy. This is something we do not do well and have not done properly.
I'd like to quickly jump into one comment. Following this, for instance, in digitalization, we talk about robotics, AI, Internet of Things, and all this. So much so is mainly more as a productivity tool than actually leveraging it highly to make it into industries. Exactly what you said, SMEs, the ecosystem surrounding, supporting them, we are investing a lot in R&D in this. Are we going to leverage it into companies that actually go into production of this robotics, AI, and big platform as a regional or even global platform that employs really high-tech Singaporeans to propel us to the next level instead of just investing in R&D? Actually, yes, good, digitizing, making things more efficient, but you're not taking the next level up to make them into big companies and big corporations. I think we should have the vision and the ambition to want to do that more aggressively.
And just to complete that, and what that would mean for PMETs and for our young people would be, they would find engineering, again, highly lucrative profession to skill themselves in. The engineering education would be more commercialized, it would be market relevant, and so too would the ITE guys who would have high-value apprenticeship programs. The poly guys would also be involved, just the same as our university guys in these kinds of efforts, right? And so we're creating, we are going back again to the time when engineering was a good profession, provides good jobs for a significant share of the economy, and manufacturing jobs, it's been shown, provides 4 or 5 times the good jobs in other areas than service sector jobs does, right? This was Inderjit Singh's point, okay? So we need to think clearly about, industrial policy linked to our manpower policy going forward. And I do not see this, as something that we are sufficiently seriously doing.
Yeah, I'd like to go a little bit further upstream. And when you think about it, the argument that's made that we need foreign talent because you can't find locals to do these jobs. And my question is why? We've had 50 years of near universal education, and surely that should have produced, we have people who top all the rankings, and yet they're still not able to fill the jobs for the 21st century. So something must be wrong there. There is a disconnect. And I'd like to tell you an anecdote. Okay, about 10 years ago, I was in the northeast of the United States, and I decided to stop by a small town in Connecticut. And I visited the principal of a college who was going to move to Singapore. Asked him, I said, why is Singapore giving you all millions of dollars to set up this college in Singapore? And he said, it's very simple. He says, the Singapore government, they're very smart. They recognize the problem. They commission expensive consultants to tell them the solution to the problem. And they had been told that even though Singaporeans continuously ace all the exams and the standardized tests, we will never have a Mark Zuckerberg or a Steve Jobs until we have a liberal arts college which can teach people about humanities, about art history, about anthropology, and all the things that they learn in the liberal arts college. So I said, that's interesting. And I asked him, this is just a side, I'm sorry I'm taking time, but I asked him, so what did y'all think? And he said, we did our own market research and we realized that Singaporean parents are not going to pay for their kids to learn art history or archaeology. And so we a series of double degree programs. And so he said, I think it's going to be a win-win. It turns out he was probably wrong, unfortunately. But anyway, the point of that rather long story was that I think our education system needs to be freed up, and we need to give kids a chance to think. Singaporean kids are very creative. You look at all the memes that are going around on the internet, it's just amazing. I show them to my wife, and she says, wow, my students are doing this kind of thing. She says, I wish they had that kind of creativity in class. And you have to ask yourself, why? See, why is there only one correct answer? Helen and Ivan, why is there only one way of trying to solve that problem? See, why can't you solve it through a ton of different ways? But there seems to be only one right answer in Singapore schools. And as long as there's only one right answer in this situation where we got to depend, which is not sustainable for the future.
Yeah, if I may chip in, there are two topics here. One is, as I say, one is to address the immediate problem about jobs in Singapore. That is fast hollowing out our Singaporean PMETs. So that has to be arrested as soon as possible. The next thing is really to build a real vibrant economy going forward. And of course, we've touched on a number of topics today, a number of policies, but that one is really a very big topic. So for the first part about arresting the hollowing out of the Singaporean PMET, really one of the things that we need to do very fast is, besides sort of attracting the right kind of foreigners and then slow down some of the influx, also is like what Dr. Paul had said just now, is that how we link the manpower policy to how to link the education policy to the demands of the market. So really it puzzles me a lot why the government was not able to do that, Like for example, when we were debating this SECA and the foreign talent policy issue, there was a lot of feedback about, because India was able to produce tons of IT professionals, and Singaporean who are from the IT side only know how to manage the systems. They are not trained in the individual software. Like for example, he's not trained in Oracle, not trained in Sun Microsystem software, for example. So the university won't be able to teach everything, at the same time. So, but to me, is that don't we have the polytechnics? Don't we have the ITE? Can't the polytechnic people and the ITE people just concentrate on one system? And then we can actually take up the jobs, right? So at the end of the day, after all the debate, after all the arguments with the government, I still think that the government has not done the job. They have not done the job to ensure that whatever training and education we give to the Singaporeans are linked to the jobs in the market. They just find the easy way out, just bring in the foreigners. Yeah.
I just want to jump in here. But it's interesting also to share a story. Exactly what Paul and Manuel is talking about. I met a couple of people. This guy actually runs a IT company. So I asked the obvious question, is it really true that you can't find a local to get a job? He said, yes, it's true. You can't find. And then quickly he also added on. But the trouble with our local so-called young education, they are too theoretical. They come up, they don't know. It's not application. They want people with application knowledge, right? And then again, Tang Yin-Chi is saying that, but also the motivation is not there. Why? Because it's easier to employ these people which are quite cheap. And then I just keep turning. There's no really pressure or incentive or disincentive for me to actually go and try to hire local to teach them and train them up, because there's already made people that can come in and do the job. Nothing wrong with that. I think basically what is important to address holistically the education, the training. So the whole so-called gambit of, we call it the internship or the apprenticeship, whether from ITE or from Poly, must be revamped. And I want to share a quick experience of myself when I was running Honeywell Asia. We had, after GE, the R&D center in Bangalore, the largest R&D center in Bangalore. When I was running it, we started with 200 over engineers, and in no time we become 2,000 engineers and keep going up. And the guy who was heading is a very bright Indian engineer. But why is it that in the 90s, it was in the 90s actually, no, the late 90s, about year 2000, why is it that they can do IT so provisionally? And I asked, it's because you can't get the same kind of talent to do precision machining and all this. Because IT needs only a wall plug and a computer. You just plug it in, they can do. And they were doing simple things, we call it the drafting, to embedded software for Honeywell within 2 years. So they learn. And they're learning on the job. You don't have to go to school to do it. And basically, they just, kind of proliferate, and then they spiral up. But they don't have the same infrastructure to do machining and stuff. So they're not there to get the best so-called precision machining. You go to China, yes, because they got a lot of factory with machines and all this. So it's a matter of making sure, as Manwai say, as Paul talked about, the education, the training system must match, must meet the needs, must be able to anticipate. If there is things to be fixed, let's fix it, and don't accept it that it is like that, and therefore everybody just gives it excuse that, yeah, I wanted to employ, but there are no people who have the qualification or have the experience. Experience is for us to give opportunity for our young people to have.
Yes, yes. Sometimes it's difficult to anticipate completely. But then the thing is, I think there's ample time. When you see this happening, actually we could have matched it, match it with the proper training and education. But I think that part, our whole current industrial policies and the helping and promoting and developing the SMEs are not doing that part. They keep concentrating on what is the capabilities you need. I help you to build your capabilities. What kind of capital you need, But actually, they could go right down and see how to match the jobs. That's the first thing. If our Singaporeans, that's the point I was trying to drum into the minds of the people in Parliament recently in the debate, is that you don't allow the Singaporeans to have those opportunities to develop step by step upwards, like what Francis said just now. Then you can't have the capabilities. You cannot, sometimes the ministers say, no, we don't want Singaporeans to do the low-level job. We want them to be parachute in and do the high-level job. But, they must actually learn on the way up, So that's another thing that we have to bear in mind. I'm very mindful of that, because to build a whole, to really move into a really high-value-add industrial policies and industrial structure, we really need to start from step one. If we don't get that properly done, then people don't have the skills to build innovation. When they make innovation, then when they're ready to make innovation, then what Lam Kyong says is correct. You must give them the safety net. If they can't have the basic living guarantee for their family, you think people will be entrepreneurs? If every year I got to worry about my indirect taxes, how much the government is going to tax me, and I have no savings in my bank, you think I can be an entrepreneur? Cannot. So that's where the safety net comes in. That's, I think, what Lam Kyong is talking about. Social policy must come with industrial policy and all that. And only after all this thing is done, then we can talk about like what Francis said just now, branding, world brand, look far and high, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yes, and I think we can can learn from those countries that have done it successfully. What are they? Germany, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, and what do we see in all these places, right? We see very selective immigration policy. That means to say, if you want to come in and work here, you must be better than the locals, right? You must be able to teach them something. Otherwise, no. Okay, that's the first thing. So selective immigration policy. And I would say that, look, if you don't have selective immigration policy, how are you going to get the proper educational policy? Because right now you say, okay, it's too theoretical. Why? Because they don't want to teach the practical things. Why don't they teach the practical things? Because they can hire someone with an S-Pass at $2,500 to do it. Who wants to go and learn how to compete with an S-Pass guy earning $2,500? You have to fix that immigration problem first. If you can only hire S-Pass guys at $4,500, then the guy will say, oh, okay, I want to learn Oracle. I want to learn all those things.
Yes, yes.
Right? So you have to fix the incentives first. Right? So what did the Germans do, the Taiwanese, Koreans do? They actually fix that incentive first. They restrict immigration to only really high skilled, really high qualified, really experienced people, not just to make up the GDP numbers. Right? That's number one. Number two is that they see that, okay, we have to have the industrial policy that churns out the high value-added jobs to hire these guys. So you look at Germany, right? Their industrial policy, their SMEs, they are beating China at the high value-added manufacturing game, right? Because they are in highly specialized, highly value-added, highly engineering in a whole variety of industries that are globally competitive. And their big boys grow out of them. They are not brought in, on incentives from another country, right? So the Siemens, the BMWs, they grow out of the Mittelstand, right? And they have the infrastructure, they have the financial infrastructure, they have the Sprackhausen, they have the Exim banks, all supporting them. And then when they go abroad, you look at the recent acquisitions in Korea, right? They are now buying some of the selected German Mittelstand to fill in the selected areas in their industries among the chaebols as a whole so that they can make it to the next level collectively. Yeah. Can you imagine ourselves, our GLCs doing that? Until we cannot move and compete against them regionally.
Yeah. Our GIC will just ask the question, can we make money or not?
Yeah. So we're not there at that level of cooperation and sophistication in industrial policy that we can actually begin to systematically, rigorously create these jobs in a sustained way over the long term. Right? We haven't and don't see any evidence of that policy.
Yeah, so that's why one very important performance indicator to look at is that when we have the foreigners come in and complement us, okay, not only we should generate economic growth in the short term, but in the long term, are our capabilities increasing or not? Are our capabilities being upgraded or not? Yes. If over 20 years like what we have today, actually our Singaporean core is becoming weaker and weaker in our skills and our capabilities. Yes. That means the policy is not being run properly.
It's not being supporting it.
Yes.
And as you said, Manwai, okay, the last piece, then the education system will step up to the plate, right? So you look at Germany again, right? So who helps design the curriculum at the polytechnics? I'll tell you who. BMW helps, Siemens. They help design the curriculum to make sure that these guys are fit for purpose going out. Do we see that equivalently here? I mean, so that's the education system, right? Finally, social policy. Look at all these countries, all right? Look at Germany, look at Korea, look at Japan, look at Taiwan, look at even Hong Kong. Do they have unemployment support? Yes, they do. Do they have better wage support for people who fall out and fall into the gig economy? Yes, they do. At level 2 or 3 times higher than ours, right? do they have, for example, long-term training programs where they give you unemployment assistance up to 9 months, 12 months, so you can reskill yourselves, like in Scandinavia, in the Netherlands, in Germany, to enter as a mature, PMET that has been made redundant, let's say in woodworking, and now wants to go into IT. I have a friend who did just that. Yes, they do. Do we? No, we don't. Okay, so until we do, how can we provide our PMETs a kind of prospect until we solve the immigration problem, until we solve, the industrial policy problem, until the social policy problem, the education problem, simultaneously and in a sustained manner? How can we tackle this problem?
Actually, there is also another element, maybe you may like to comment, Lam Kiong, is there a fiscal policy as well? The reason why I talk about this really is that, in a simple question again, I was overseas for many years and basically working for big MNCs. There was no pressure from the government for me to localize. The company wants to localize and wants to pass on because there is every incentive to localize. It's very expensive to hire all the expatriate. Basically, it's like after 5 years, if an expatriate wants to stay on, you go on local terms. Otherwise you go home, and some of them stay on local terms. And we localize for a selfish reason because you want the bottom line to grow too. And your costs got to be contained, and you're there in the market. You want the locals to actually manage your operations and manage the company. So from the incentive viewpoint, I think there is room here to actually make sure that, we bring in people. Yes, they're talented people. They got to be incentivized. The company got incentivized to get them to pass on the experience, their skill to transfer to local. That's one way. And we're talking about the higher level, not talking about the lower level. So all level you're going to tackle. But apparently there isn't any incentive to do that, right? Because it's so easy to just carry on doing the same thing because there's no disincentive. Okay, if you don't want to create this incentive, create an incentive to help localize so that the companies can help do that. The other point I want to quickly address really is that not too long ago there was this talk about bringing the super high-tech people coming across, right?
Tech Plus.
The Tech Plus. I think we should take one more step further to say, why won't we go to the Silicon Valley or go to the Shenzhen or whatever? You spot those talent, people who have got great ideas with a business model, bring them over not to work, bring them over to partner with our SME to form joint ventures where they have a stake in it and be able to grow together, build the industry here, and then create an ecosystem for them. That is much more bigger value to Singapore and bigger potential to create employment than just coming here to work for a while and then to go away, or maybe take advantage of the schemes here for what you call it, R&D and stuff like that. So if we are committed to do that, and back to your point about having an organization to help the SME, this could be a very good way to really bring, tongue-in-cheek, the young Mike Zuckerberg when they were just starting out, and bring them here to be able to partner, not just work here, partner with us. Give them the incentive that afterward they make their dollars, they want to sell out their shares, by all means. But there must be some of this out-of-the-box thinking to get us to a different level.
Yeah, I think a quick reminder at this stage for those of us listening in to actually type in your questions at the chat. We'll be moving on to the Q&A quite shortly. And I think that really brings us very adequately to a good sort of point to actually transition to the last topic on social policy. I think we adequately discussed immigration, the industrial policy certainly, even education I think was weaved in here and there. And on that point, education actually, I just want to share one example from my own life in university. Just quite recently there was a Finnish exchange student, and he studied engineering, of course, and he basically shared that there was a lot of times with Nokia. And of course, Nokia is no longer a mobile phone company today. A lot of it is moved into cloud computing and software, but it's still very much thriving. And he said, honestly, 60% of his time in university was spent at Nokia, essentially working, and the studying is only the 40%. And in his own words, he said, in Finland, the government pays us to study university. That was his expression, because when they are working in university, they are considered working for Nokia, and they are employed and they earn money. So they don't actually have to pay school fees for university. So I thought that was a very interesting comparison, for us local students and getting some cultural exchange from overseas. So at this stage, really, we want to talk finally about social policy, and we have talked a little bit about it. Mr. Yeo, you mentioned about Germany and some of the things they're doing over there, but perhaps we could localize it to our own context. Particularly, you previously mentioned in your introductory remarks about the workfare income supplement, right? And of course, the issue of basically making sure there's adequate unemployment support for PMETs, who are finding new opportunities. There's a certain transition period, certainly. And Mr. Leong, of course, mentioned about the certain leeway granted for entrepreneurs, maybe even, to step out of their comfort zone, give them some floating space, so to speak, if they choose to take on and start their own business. So I think some of these ideas have already been thrown out there. Dr. Tambaya, would you have any thoughts about, how this social policy can be effected?
Yes, definitely. And, some of these things were in our manifesto in the last general election. For example, minimum wage, which the PAP is slowly coming around to, although they don't want to call it a minimum wage. And I know the PSP has argued for minimum wage, that's for sure. The other thing was
minimum living wage.
Minimum living wage, there you go. Not just enough to have food and water and a roof over your head. You at least have to live like a human being. I think that's important. And the other thing was the retrenchment insurance. This is something that people should pay in for. And as Lam Kiong has pointed out, every high-income developed country is doing that. And again, as Man Mai pointed out, if you don't have the safety net, you're not going to stick your neck out. You're not going to try something different. You just want to keep doing the same thing again and again because you're so afraid that your rice bowl will be taken away from you. So these are really important things. And the other issue, which I think we sort of touched on briefly, was the idea of inequality. Because Singapore is one of the most unequal societies amongst the high-income countries. The Gini coefficient, the way it's worked out in Singapore is very odd because it excludes the EP holders, it excludes the migrant workers. So you've taken away the top and the bottom of the inequality calculation. It's the only country, as far as I know, which does that. And so it's already bad enough. But if you read the works of Teo Yu Yen and others, it's very clear that inequality is very real. Even the PAP MPs have commented on this. That Carrie Tan, she commented that she thinks that social workers who go to university may not be able to relate to the people that they're working amongst, which is really odd in a way. But there is this perception that we've got two Singapores. We've got the comfortable Singapore that goes on holiday, that, is on the internet. And then you've got the other part, which are struggling, which are doing two jobs, which are in the gig economy, and the kids don't see their parents, and they run into trouble and all this kind of thing. So those have to be addressed, and they can be addressed. There are many things which can be addressed, but the fundamental assumption has to be there that everybody, no matter who you're born to, you deserve the right to, as a person living in Singapore, to a decent quality of life.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think certainly that is, the issue of income inequality in Singapore is a pressing one, and definitely also deserves a much wider discussion as well. So I think at this point, we would like to close off this forum discussion, but before we do, we actually, I would now like to invite Mr. Leong to actually say a few words with regards to a message he has for the respondents to our survey and the Singaporeans at large as well.
One message that I'd like to give to all the respondents and also the participants today is that like what the name of our session today is about, beyond the jobs debate. So the job situation in Singapore continues to be very challenging. So we really hope that all of you will continue to pay attention to the developments. What PSP and the other parties will do in Parliament and outside Parliament is that we'll continue to put pressure on the government. We will check on the progress every few months to make sure that there's improvement for Singaporeans. Then for your part, what we want you to do is we hope you can continue to give us feedback and also to really, in your own workplace, observe whether there are changes or not. I mean, some of the things that you can look at is, for example, is the HR hiring fair? Are there more and more foreigners at the workplace? You find that, you know, after all this debate and after all the government's recognition that there is a problem, the situation is still not improving. Then I hope you all can continue to give us feedback, you know, whether the percentage of foreigners continue to increase in your company or not, you know. And then when the foreigners come in, are they duly qualified, you know, and has there been soft skills transfer, you know, from the foreigners to the locals, if the foreigner is a boss. If he's the boss, you know, whether if he's the boss, whether the number 2 man is a local or not, you know, all these things, I think you all can monitor and then give us feedback. We really want to ensure that the debate that we have done in Parliament and the recognition by the government will really lead to substantial improvement in the job situation and the livelihood of Singaporeans. I think that's the message I think Sean wants me to give to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leong. So at this point, we will now move on to our Q&A segment. And I have the questions here on the phone. So perhaps I'll start with the first question from Mr. To Han Shi. And this goes to Mr. Yeo. So the question is this. The 3 Nobel Prize winners in economics this year found that immigration of foreign workers did not necessarily lower wages for local workers. What do you have to say in response to this?
Okay, I think, thanks for that question, Hanshi. I think you have to keep in mind that the research on immigration and foreign workers is done in the case of David Card and Alan Kreuger, largely on U.S. samples and looking at immigration to the U.S., right? From across the border, the low income, or, you know, on the higher level, the green card workers, as well as the plant pass workers. I would say that the scale of immigration that they're experiencing there, as you've seen, is 20 to 40 times less per capita than the scale of immigration. In Singapore, we mentioned just now, right, that at the peak, the employment pass was alone 200% of a school-going cohort. It's only 5% in the US. So small wonder that there's hardly any impact in the US, but in Singapore there is a measurable dampening of wages that has made us Singaporeans not want to be engineers anymore from my time until today. I mean, so I would say it's a totally different scale of things. Okay, so that's my answer. I think on the scale of the US, that probably, you know, Carl and Kreuger's studies, because they're very scientific, you know, they simulate real-world experiments, is pretty good, but it's not applicable to such an excessive state of immigration as in Singapore. And as such, because of this excessive immigration that is taking place over 2 decades, and for the PMETs over 1 decade cumulatively, year after year, we have to have much bolder, stronger, more sustained measures to reverse it. That's the point. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. So the next question comes from Mr. Ernest Ho, and this is open to the floor, to everyone. So his question is this. The finance and banking sector is just the tip of the iceberg that is more visible and prominent to common Singaporeans. But there are many other areas, such as the services industry, that is being dominated by foreigners. Singapore's 40% foreign workforce in Singapore has been paying more income taxes than all the Singaporean workforce combined since 2010 to 2011. Will Singapore's economic defense and resilience be compromised as a result of this?
Yeah, I'll start on that. In the first place, you know, income tax is not as high as corporate tax, and Singapore doesn't have any wealth taxes either. And bear in mind, both SDP and PSP are not against high-value foreigners coming into Singapore. So if you have high-value foreigners, if they're coming in at a minimum wage of $10,000 a month, they're going to be paying a significant amount of income tax. And I think that they will be making a significant contribution to Singapore. So I'm not too concerned about that aspect of if we cut down on the immigration to a more reasonable level that can actually benefit Singaporeans and the people here.
And if I can add on to what Dr. Paul has said, there is an argument out there. There's an argument out there that in academic term, they call lump of work fallacy. That means the assumption, they say that the assumption that if you take back 50 jobs from the foreigners, 50 Singaporeans can be found to do the 50 jobs. So they say that it's a fallacy. You take back the 50 jobs, you still cannot find 50 Singaporeans to do it. So as a result, you don't get the economic benefits. But as I've said just now, it's not true in Singapore because most of the foreign PMETs that are in Singapore, they are at relatively low wage and salary levels. So such jobs Singaporeans can do. But it is because the immigration policy is there, the employers in Singapore also take the advantage that since they are cheap foreigners, what for I employ Singaporeans? So that's why the jobs are not going to Singaporeans. Okay? So the moment we actually rebalance the job market and take back some of the jobs, actually it will be a net contribution to our GDP. That is the way we look at it. Yeah.
Great. So we have the next question coming from Ms. Catherine Siu, and this is again addressed to Mr. Yeo regarding something he mentioned in his introductory remarks. He says, you mentioned about increasing the percentage in the manufacturing roles. Which industries are you referring to? How can we compete against our neighbor countries?
That's a very good question, Catherine. Thanks for asking that question. I think the answer to that is that we can compete in high value added space, right? So if for example, we look at countries like Korea and Taiwan, they are also high income countries like Japan, right? So they have shares of manufacturing to GDP that are in nearly at the 30% of GDP, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean, even though the costs are much higher than, let's say, the region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, they are still dominant, and Germany, for that matter, is a similar situation. They're still dominant in higher value-added space. So what happens is that we can go back and occupy the niches that we once had and Singapore once had 28% of manufacturing in GDP, 15 years ago, and we've just eroded it over the years. But if we were to make a concerted effort in the areas, in the high value added areas, for example, that Mr. Indigit, productization, commercialization, prototyping, and so forth, most practitioners that you talk to will say that, yes, we do have still the residual human capital and the connections to gain back that kind of high value added market share, right? Microelectronics is one big area that we can regain. Biomedical is one big area. Aerospace is another big area, right? So there are niches for us out there, and machining is one big area, high value added, and we can actually divide the work between the region and ourselves, where we do the high value added segments, the design, prototyping, the high-end management, the executive management, business development in Singapore, and have those operations located in the region, right? So there's no reason why, and given especially as you say, how competitive these regional industries are in low value added areas, it would mean that together with them, we can actually take global market share, right? So there is definitely a role for Singapore in manufacturing in high value added space and high value added jobs for our own PMETs.
Thank you for that answer. So the next question comes from Vincent, and his question is, how can a foreign talent be compelled to transfer knowledge? Otherwise, how can we build the Singaporean core? And I think this question he left open to the floor.
Yeah, I alluded to it earlier on regarding the fiscal policy thing. There must be incentive for them to do so. I mean, all this incentive for them for the company to do so, actually. Meaning that the company employ the foreign talent over here. These are, when we say foreign, they are real foreign talent. They are here for a time, and they are here to actually contribute to the company and help the company to set up things or help the company to develop further. But along the way, actually help to groom the successor to take over their jobs. And preferably to groom local successor, unless we do not have the next level to be able to step forward to be groomed. And therefore, it means that the system must be such that there's either tax incentive or some other incentive that compels the company to do so. unfortunately, at this point in time, there are very little incentive or disincentive that makes the company wants to do so, and the availability of this talent are, quote unquote, so easily available, then there's no incentive to do it. So the challenge now is to make sure, as we move forward, to look into this area and see how do we create this incentive or disincentive for the companies to make this contribution.
Yeah, actually, Francis, it's actually more the general policy, okay? Because right now, our policy is quite liberal. If the policy is make more clear-cut that all these skills transfer is required, like for example, I'm sure in the China case that you are very familiar with, in China, if you make the foreigner the number one, they will demand you to have the China is number two, right? Right? Yeah, that's the case. So, I mean, we can do that in Singapore as well. So, I don't think we need to necessarily give tax incentives just by controlling the numbers. Okay, I think we can actually, we don't coerce, but then we can actually encourage the foreign talent to actually transfer the skills and to groom the locals in the process. Then, of course, I mean, once he has done a good job, of course, the company will also can see the benefits they've created. I think the companies will be able to also give him a better prospects and all that. So I think generally to let the foreigners who come into the country to work together with the locals and then to upgrade the capabilities of the locals, this is actually a standard practice in the world, you ask me. I work in Japan before, and even in
we are the exception.
We are the exception, you see, we are the exception. We just say that everybody can come in, and then the cheaper the better, so that really hollow out all our expertise. Yeah.
To be fair, that was in the past, Manwar, and I think since 2010, the government has tried to be more restrictive. But I think it's also, we need to recognize, that's why we went into the history, that we have a big backlog, right, of existing people, foreigners, already being employed, and we have inherited a situation where you can still employ S-plus people at 2005, right? Yeah. So there needs to be some basic changes to the realignment of the pricing structure. And, we recognize that there's a stock. It will take time, right? We need to do this over a few years, right? They do contribute 40% of the taxes, but if we can phase them out over the next 3 to 5 years and phase our people in, the same amount of taxes will be collected, except more from our own people, right? So it's a matter of recognizing where we are, and because we have got such a big problem after so many years of bad policy, we have turned it around, but we need to persist and we need to fix those areas that haven't been fixed, like the misalignment of prices, the support from social policy, support from industrial policy, support from educational policy. That hasn't been engaged yet, right?
And actually, I don't, from the point of view that they are 40% of our workforce, they are paying 40% of taxes, I think those numbers we still have to get from the government in terms of income tax. So when we come to the issue of debating the GST going forward, that will be what PSP will be demanding from the government going forward. Exactly the foreigners that come in to Singapore, is it a net benefit? Because besides paying for the income tax, we don't know how much income tax they pay. The government claims that they pay a lot of GST as well, okay? We don't know how much, but then that's one thing. The other aspect is that what are the costs involved in actually housing such a big group of foreign talents in Singapore, I mean, the recent COVID has demonstrated that there's actually a big hidden cost, and on top of that, we have to increase our infrastructure, and our healthcare system will also have to take care of them and all that. So all these costs actually have to be considered in totality before we can actually come to a conclusion about whether they are net benefit. But as I said just now, the lump of work fallacy usually doesn't apply in Singapore. The jobs can be taken over by the Singaporeans. But we are not saying that the Singaporeans will take over the whole 40% of the foreign PMETs who are here. So, but even we take back 10%, it will be positive for our GDP and for our taxes. That I'm very confident.
Yeah. So at this stage, we have another question from Mr. Charles Lee, again open to the floor. And he is introducing a suggestion here. He says, should we have a differentiated visa class for different sectors for like what we see in Australia? I noticed that some jobs in Singapore are quite manual in labor, which not a lot of Singaporeans want to do. In other words, can a differentiated visa class system help to rebalance our workforce? I think a novel suggestion. Anyone would like to speak on this?
Yeah, our STP policy talent track actually is somewhat similar to that. But you have to ask yourself, in countries like Japan, Korea, the Scandinavian countries, a lot of the manual work is done by local people. And that's because the salaries of people in the manual categories are relatively high. There's a lot of use of technology and machines. And so the work is actually considered not as grimy or manual or as it is in Singapore. In fact, among the high-income countries, Singapore is probably one of the exceptions in that we still use a lot of manual labor. The productivity in these sectors is very low because there's so much cheap labor that's available. So what we all were talking about, the incentives and disincentives are just not there. I mean, if you go to Australia, you find the last time I went, it seems like forever, but it was like 2 years ago. Next to my hotel, they were doing some renovations. And there was like 3 workers. Each of them drove there. They had a cooler full of beer. They start working. They set up all the different machines. At 12 o'clock on the dot, they stop work. They have their beer and their sandwiches. Then 1 o'clock on the dot, they go back to work. And it's a reasonable quality of life for somebody who's doing building, but it's a very high technology process, uses a lot of devices, machines, and technology. And so it can be done by a small number of people who are drawing a reasonable salary. So I think we need to think about that.
Also to add on, during the debate for these foreign PMETs and all that, the government always conflict, the whole issue. But we have been very clear in differentiating that we are focusing on the PMETs, the professionals, the managers, the executives. So the main thrust of our argument is to protect the jobs of the PMETs. When it comes to the non-PMETs, the construction workers and all those work permit holders, actually we can go a bit more relaxed on that, okay? But nevertheless, what Dr. Paul has said just now is also one aspect of our overall economic structure and job market structure that we would like to look into. But I think our main focus will still be our own PMETs. Because right now, what is very worrying is that the Singaporean PMETs are being displaced from the market.
Yeah. So we have time for one final question, and it actually, in a way, calls for some concrete solutions. This question comes from Mr. Koo, and I think I would address it to the whole floor. And Mr. Koo wants to know, what are the immediate steps that can be taken to address the unemployment issues we face? And from what I understand, where this question is coming from is really looking to some of the concrete solutions that is able to be implemented immediately that will have effects to really alleviate some of the pains that Singaporeans are going through at present now.
So let me start. Again, as a physician, even though I do research and teaching, but I also encounter patients. And I can tell you the one thing that really hurts the most is not having cash in your pocket. And so these people are getting by, and then something happens, somebody gets sick. And even though there's a 90% subsidy, they've still got to pay that 10%. And that 10%, if you have no cash in your pocket, is a real hardship. Then you end up borrowing from your relatives, or you end up trying to come up with some kind of installment plan, or you're just sandwiched. So you don't actually meet the criteria for the full subsidy. And so if you ask me what's the most immediate thing, I think it's to put cash in the pockets of people. And this can be done through some kind of retrenchment benefit, some kind of unemployment insurance. There are many different ways of doing it, and we'd leave it to the people to come up with a good solution.
Yeah, I'd like to chip in on this. I think there's a very good question. The fourth element of the 4 things we talked about today, right? Immigration policy first and foremost. And then secondly, we talked about industrial policy, we talked about education policy, but we talked about social policy. Social policy is as important as the other three policies, because there'll be good times and there'll be bad times. There will be difficulties when you transition from one industry to another. There'll be sunset times and sunrise times, and the times in between, the twilight in between sunrise and the dawn, right? The darkest hours of the night. That has to be bridged by social policy. Otherwise, the social compact will not survive these tumultuous times that we're going through. What are we going through? We went through COVID. We're going to go through artificial intelligence taking away 40% of the jobs, including PMET jobs. We're going to go through China and America being at war over the global economy, at least in economic terms. We're going to go through all these things, right? And so, how are we going to get through it without unemployment insurance, 3 to 6 months. 3 months is minimum, because otherwise you're wasting the experience that this mature guy has gained over the years. He has to grab next gig of being a Grab driver. He cannot put to use his 30 years as a sales supervisor somewhere more productively, right? Or he cannot train himself, right? So, and we can extend that to beyond 6 months, 6 to 9 months to 12 months, if he undergoes serious training in approved fields, right? Like they do in Scandinavia. We have the money to do that, right? Rather than just skills future, it goes for a cooking course, or goes for an art course. Let's be serious, right? 6 months, 9 months structured programs with cost of living provided. We can do that, right? That's immediate. Secondly, we can have workfare income supplement. Instead of getting a miserly 150, 200 bucks a month, we can add on 500 to 600 bucks a month straight away. Even if you're in a gig economy, you can at least put food on the table, as opposed to be in between gigs and not being able to put food on the table. So that's immediate help. This is what Paul is talking about. At least go to the doctor, at least feed your children, get them to school, can have money for tuck shop. These are serious issues, all right, that we face right now. The third is, you can have a silver support scheme that is accessible, right? First of all, why are we only giving $300 a month, right? The latest study shows that you need $2,000 a month. We're giving $300 a month. Not asking for $2,000, but surely you can give another $500-600 a month to the Silver Support Scheme, right? And you can make Silver Support Scheme available to the PMETs that have. I know PMETs who in the heyday were like Chief Security Officer of Pan Pacific. Today, what's he doing? After 40 years of gig economy, he's pushing cardboard in Serangoon Road, right? He has an HDB flat, right? It's paid up, so he doesn't qualify for Silver Support Scheme. Extend it to him. If he can show that he's the PMET, he's been displaced, he's tried best efforts, he can't make it, give him the $500-600 a month. In the first place, give him $500-600 a month. These are immediate things that we can do that we are not doing. And by the way, this is a fraction of what they do in Scandinavia, okay? But we can at least do this, or Taiwan, or Korea, right? And this makes all the other things work.
I would also add that as we reopen the economy, and there are jobs that have been lost over the past 2 years, the PMET, foreign jobs, I think we ought to be very serious about making sure that every available job that reopens up, we give our local a chance to go to that. And it's got to be just not lip service, but making sure, especially for those who have been displaced, like Nam Kiong was talking about, Nothing wrong with driving a Grab, but the poor guy, after driving for Grab for 2 years, on his CV is not going to look very good when he go back to the job market, and he's going to lose out to people who've been working even in his original profession in different capacity. So, giving that priority, all things being equal, must be also very important for the immediate term. And I'm sure there are lots. The MOM brags about the 22,000 jobs available. I'm sure, if those are real PMET jobs, yes. But there are definitely jobs that will re-emerge. I think that is going to be very vital for our local PMETs.
Well, one of the thing is that actually during this COVID period, the number of foreigners have decreased tremendously, decreased by quite a big number, maybe about 150 to 200,000. Okay, but most of the jobs actually are from the non-PMET sectors. The construction workers and all those factory workers are going home. Okay, but the higher level PMETs decline is not so much. From 400,000, they declined by about 40,000, to 360,000 and all that. So, but nevertheless, like what Francis have said, maintaining it at 350 or even 360 or even slowly through natural attrition when the visa comes for renewal, I think is an important step that we must take in the next few years to rebalance our job market. Okay.
And that can be done, as you were suggesting, and Mr. Ravi Menon has been suggesting, by raising the S-Pass and the EP minimum wages, right? That's an immediate thing.
Yeah, so I think that really brings our discussion to a very fruitful close by ending off with some real-world solutions that can be implemented straight away. That we would like to put forth and hopefully start a wider conversation about some of the problems and some of the ways that we can overcome the hurdles. Certainly, it has been said that the COVID situation has exacerbated inequalities in Singapore, and one thing that really bears pressing home that in Singapore we have taken a much more conservative approach to COVID management in contrast to some other countries, and as a result, there are a lot of closures of businesses, and so I'm certain that Singaporeans will feel the pain of COVID with the approach that we have taken in COVID management. So certainly, I believe some of these solutions may resonate with them, and hopefully they will respond as well. So with that, I would like to thank everyone on the panel for joining us in this discussion today. We hope that you have some takeaways from what we have discussed. But before we end, we would like to welcome, not welcome, but really pass the floor again to Mr. Yuan to just say a few words in closing.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. It has been a very lively discussion. I'm really thankful to our guests, Paul and Lam Keong, and together with my colleague Man Wai, for discussing various aspects. I mean, basically, essentially, we're talking about, the immigration policies, the social policies, the industrial policies, and the education policy, and to a certain extent, even fiscal policies that will have an impact on this continuous discussion on how we could alleviate, in the short term and the long term, our PMETs plight. And it's important, again, to talk about our Singapore core, how we're going to develop them. And you could also see that, it is almost like an appetizer today to tee up for various discussion in the future. I mean, if you are really interested, like Man Wai has said, continue to engage with us, give us your input, give us a feedback, give us a suggestion. We don't have all the answers. Nobody have all the answers. But together, if we start to put our brains together, maybe we could put out some more constructive ideas to continue to keep this subject alive. And even maybe in future, to go on a series of these forums, go a bit more deeper with different guests coming on board to discuss, and even yourself coming forward to share your experiences in this forum. And this is the whole idea of having the forum like that, to be able to feedback to you and give you an opportunity to hear us, and we also an opportunity for us to hear from you. We hope you have enjoyed this, and I can't emphasize more that without your feedback, it will be just we talking. At the end of the day, PSP and our colleagues in the other alternate parties, SDP, are here to reflect the views, the aspiration, the concern, and the problems of the people. We are not talking in isolation or just making rhetoric. We want to hear real issues. At the same time, we want to have constructive ideas and solutions to present. And with that, I once again thank Paul and Lam Keong for a very lively discussion. We really didn't rehearse this whole thing. It was just off the cuff, and I think we all spoke from our heart. We don't quote a lot of numbers, except Man Wai is good in all the numbers, but we think it is a very important issue. It's very important, and the future of Singapore rests with the Singapore core, and the Singapore core is the pillar of our economy. If we don't solve the problem, we can never solve our future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Francis. And with that, we at the Progress Singapore Party would like to wish you a very pleasant weekend. Stay safe, thank you, and goodbye.
Interested to join us? Scan this QR code on the screen now, and it will bring you to our website where you can find out more about Progress Singapore Party. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed this event. Stay connected with us by visiting links.psp.org.sg. Alternatively, you may scan the QR code on the screen. Take care and see you next time.